Hi, everyone, and welcome to Yuanyu Perspectives. Today, we're diving into a topic that affects not just trade and business, but your wallet too, US tariffs. Let's start with a simple question. Who actually pays tariffs? I've watched some street interviews with MAGA voters in the US, and honestly, I was surprised. Quite a few Americans think that foreign governments pay these tariffs. Some don't even realize tariffs are taxes, maybe because the word tariff doesn't contain tax. But let's clear this up with help from economist Armin Alkian. In his textbook Universal Economics, he explains that who bears the cost of tariffs depends on elasticity. That is, how sensitive buyers and sellers are to price changes. I actually wrote about this back during Trump's first trade war. Here's the basic rule. If consumers are less flexible, the importing country pays. If producers are less flexible, the exporting country pays. Given that the U.S. no longer has industrial supply chains comparable to China's, and that no other country in the world can easily match China in terms of quality, speed, scale, and price, the result of imposing high tariffs on Chinese goods is that most of the burden ends up falling on the American people. But who exactly in the U.S. pays? Importers or end consumers? Again, it depends on relative elasticity between the importer and the buyer, and economic research backs this up. A study by economists Pablo Fadelbaum, Penelope Goldberg, Patrick Kennedy, and Amit Khandelwal looked at Trump's 2018-2019 tariffs on washing machines, solar panels, aluminum, steel, and Chinese EU goods. They found that U.S. companies and consumers paid the full cost of the tariffs. The result? A net economic loss of $16 billion per year, with over $114 billion in losses to firms and consumers, only partially offset by minor gains, protected industries, and government revenue. Another study by Mary Amidi, Stephen Redding, and David Weinstein also found that U.S. businesses and consumers bore the cost. For example, steel prices initially passed through 100% of the tariff. After a year, exporters lowered their prices, but even then, U.S. buyers still paid more than before tariffs. The U.S. International Trade Commission also confirmed this. Steel prices rose 22%, aluminum rose 8%, and Chinese goods under Section 301 tariffs passed costs to U.S. importers, who then passed them along to buyers. But here's where it gets worse. When companies hold market power, they tend to raise prices even more than the tariff cost. Economist Sebastian Howd and Wen-Jun Wang found that every $1 tariff on solar panels raised final installation prices by $1.34. Similarly, a study by Aaron Flahan, Ali Hortaxu, and Felix Tinelnot showed that after the tariffs, washing machines rose $86 per unit, dryers, which weren't even tariff, rose $92 per unit. Other studies confirm this spillover effect too. Here's a third effect that contradicts Trump's promise. Tariffs don't create jobs, they reduce them. A Federal Reserve study found that steel tariffs cut U.S. manufacturing jobs by about 0.6%, or roughly 75,000 jobs lost. And fourth, lower-income households suffer more. Tariffs raise the cost of everyday items, so the poor are hit harder, deepening inequality. And finally, there's retaliation. Tariffs almost always trigger retaliatory tariffs from other countries. U.S. economists estimate that between 2018 and 2019, retaliatory tariffs led to $27 billion in lost U.S. exports. So here's the economic bottom line of Trump's tariff policy. 1. Higher costs for U.S. consumers and importers. 2. Fewer exports for U.S. businesses. 3. Fewer jobs for American workers. Let's zoom out. America's post-World War II economic dominance peaked in the early 1990s, and that lines up with a sharp drop in average U.S. tariff rates, from over 20% in 1949 to under 5% by 1994. In fact, the global economic boom of the past 40 years, especially in developing countries, was built on a lowering of tariffs and trade barriers, fueling globalization and shared growth. Now, let's revisit Armin Alkian's perspective on why tariffs are harmful. Alkian emphasized that prices are signals in a market. They help allocate scarce resources efficiently. When governments use tariffs to interfere, they distort those price signals. For example, if foreign steel is cheaper but gets taxed, local steel becomes artificially more attractive, even if it's less efficient. This misallocates resources and favors the wrong producers. And here's the key. Misallocation of resources is the root cause of economic crises. Worse, tariffs create bad incentives. Instead of investing in innovation or efficiency, protected industries focus on lobbying politicians for more protection. This leads to rent-seeking behavior, where companies fight for favors instead of customers. So even though tariffs can protect industries in the short term, they often weaken them in the long run. Want proof? Take shipbuilding. The U.S. once built over 50% of the world's ships. Today, that number is below zero. 1%. Yes, you heard that right. 0.1%. Even the U.S. government now admits this is a national security threat. But tariffs won't bring back shipbuilding because, as Alkin put it, tariffs are a reward for inefficiency. Trying to revive an industry by rewarding inefficiency is a fantasy. So when Trump raised the average U.S. tariff rate from single digits to 15%, he didn't just hurt U.S. consumers. He damaged America's long-term competitiveness. Even if the government collects more money in the short run, it's like drinking poison to quench your thirst. And let's be honest, I don't even believe the tariff revenue matches what Trump claims. Meanwhile, his so-called beautiful act keeps expanding the federal deficit. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to UNU Perspectives. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to support what I do, feel free to buy me a coffee. I appreciate it. See you in the next episode.